Has anybody done a deconstruction of the Victoriana before? Maybe actually with Michael? Okay, a few veterans in the room, good guys from the cult, that's excellent. Well, one thing I can guarantee you, whether you're tasting it for the first time or whether you're tasting it for the 1000th time and this is your second deconstruction, you will always learn something new about Victoriana every time you come to it. And that's just because Victoriana is, without question, the most complex whisky we have in the Glen Scotia core range. Now, I don't tend to like this word complex very much, right? We overuse it in whisky. Yeah. Complex is a word I use at the end of the evening when I'm tired and I don't really want to, explain myself. Do you like whiskey in your glass, Nick? Yeah, it's lovely. It's very complex. Go away. That's what complex is. We overuse it and therefore it becomes it sort of loses meaning. But with Victoriana, I think it's really worthy of the title. It is genuinely an incredibly complex whisky. It is wonderfully complicated. It has many layers that go into sort of crafting it. So it's worthy of the title complex. Not just in terms of flavour, but its DNA and its construction, which is what Ashley and Corey are going to take us through today. But its goal for us is actually pretty simple. Victoriana is the dram that we have tasked with transporting us back to the Victorian era, so Campbeltown's whisky making heyday. Now some of you may know this already, I know, but allow me to set the scene for a minute, just indulge me, okay, we'll get through this together, I promise. If you go back to the Victorian heyday with Victoriana, you've got to imagine Campbeltown, it's a very different era. This is when Campbeltown was the Victorian whisky making capital of the world, 5th whisky region, smallest, most important without question. You've got up to 30 distilleries packed into this tiny town. Do a 360 anywhere you like in town and you'll probably spot one or at least two. I have no factual evidence for that, but it sounds good. You've got now on every inhabitant involved or linked in some way, shape or form to Victoriana's creation. To Campbeltown Whisky's creation. You've got whisky coursing down the streets, off the harbour walls, casks being filled, boats in the port. Again, I have no factual evidence for this, but it's a powerful image, right? Basically, Glen Scotia was in Campbeltown during its absolute heyday where it was just the focal point of whisky in the world, and that's really special. Once upon a time, wherever you were in the world, there was probably a little bit of Campbeltown in your dram glass if you were drinking a whisky. So Victoriana is intended to sort of take us back to what would have been a classic Campbeltown malt, okay? But the big question for us, of course, is, well, how do you know what that should taste like, number one? I don't think any of us have relatives living that long. I'm sorry if you do, to be honest. But it's really hard to say, well, what should that have been like and what should that have tasted like and how do you put it back together? And the best people to help us understand that particular dark art and process is the whisky making team. So today we have not one, but two people from our whisky making team. If you've not met them already, fantastic you're here with us today and you get to. We have Ashley Smith, who is our master blender for Glen Scotia. So for those who don't know, obviously you might have met Ian McAllister if you've been in town before. Ian is our master distiller. Ian's job is filling new make spirits into casks for us to use further down the track. Ashley's on the upper end of that, crafting the whiskies, doing the blending, doing the vatting, and basically putting together the core expressions that we love and know today. And with Ashley we have Corey Martin, who is our whisky blender and also looks after our single cask program as well. So we brought out the big guns for you here today, guys, to help understand this dram. So without further ado, Ash, do you want to tell us what you're going to be taking us through today and how this journey will unfold?
Yes, so a decade of Victoriana, we're celebrating 10 years of the iconic Victoriana dram. It really pays homage, as Nick said, to the whiskies coming out of Campbeltown in the 19th century when the town was in its boom time. You would inevitably, in the middle of the 19th century, if you were drinking Scotch whisky, it would be Campbeltown malt. 30 active distilleries at its height. Obviously today there's only 3 remaining distilleries and proudly Glen Scotia is one of those, so Victoriana was really about celebrating Campbeltown in its boom time. The dram that you have in your hand is a really special dram. This is actually the very next Victoriana. This is the batch in progress, so you will be some of the first people to try Victoriana in its core state. So, as Nick said, a very complex recipe, one of our most complex recipes. Lots of elements coming together here. So the real backbone of Victoriana is that first fill bourbon, 10 to 12 years old, real distillery character there, robust, oily. Then we've got a smaller portion of that heavily peated liquid that we produce. We only produce it for 4 weeks of the year. And as we go through the next hour, we'll talk to why we've used heavily peated liquid in such a small portion. And then, although it's a non-age statement whisky, we have whiskies in here between 16, 18, up to 20 years old. And again, as we go through the session, we'll talk about the decisions that were made to really create Victoriana as it was. But the dram that you have in your hand is that base recipe. We take that base liquid and we put 70% of it into medium char, heavily charred casks, and then the other 30% goes into PX. So this is a portion of the recipe that is currently maturing in heavily charred casks. It's been in there for 3 months, but we will mature it on up to a year. So yeah, this is the preview of batch 10, I believe, Victoriana, that will be hitting your shelves in the very near future. But it's just to get a really great idea of the work in progress at the moment. So,
Ashley?
Yes.
Do you have a prescribed amount of time, or do you just taste it every few weeks until you think it's ready when you put it into heavily charred casks?
We've really stuck with that core recipe from the very beginning. So my job is to make sure that the Victoriana is very consistent, and so it will be that 1 year in the PX and the 1 year in the heavily charred casks. We then bring it back together, marry it for a month or two. So yeah, a real work in progress. The medium char casks, the reason that we selected those was again to pay homage to the history of the region. So it was very much known as an illicit distilling area, the Kintyre Peninsula and Arran, and what that would mean is really small stills. Lots of direct firing as well. So obviously we don't have direct fired stills today, but what that direct fire process does with the stills is it creates hotspots in the copper, caramelizes the distillate that's bubbling away inside, and creates a really lovely caramelized character. We obviously couldn't recreate that with our steam fired stills, but the heavily charred cask replicate that flavour. So with the charring process, it breaks down the sugars that are naturally occurring in the wood. We have a couple of examples here, I think, of heavily charred and medium charred casks, so please feel free to hand these around. So that heavily charred process, it's basically throwing a flame at the cask. We do it by time and the coopers do it by eye. So this is about 5 minutes with direct flame, caramelising all those lovely oak sugars and recreating the style of whiskies that would have been produced in these small illicit stills in the area. So what do we make of the dram so far? Is it familiar to you? If you've had Victoriana before, does it?
Yes. There's a latent flavour in Victoriana.
Yeah, real citrus character, but again, that real honeyed sweetness coming from that char process.
Ashley, given how married
Sorry?
together or not married?
This is the heavily charred portion.
So the EX part is not in it.
Does not contain any PX, yeah.
So what we're doing at the moment, we're basically breaking it down into stages. So what you're seeing in the stage, I'll let you talk about exactly what you're seeing in the stage actually, but because you've got so many different ages of liquid, and profiles of liquid going into Victoriana, before you even put it off into heavy charred cast, up to the PX cast, what you're seeing is basically, in its, what do you want to call it, its adolescence, it's, it's partway through the journey. And then when you start to obviously the PX finishing on and the heavy char finishing on as well, you get a whole new dimension. So I mean, Victoriana for me, this is why I say it's so complex, right? Because if it was an arcade game, it would be like Tetris. You're just building up layers and layers and layers of different ages, different spirit profiles, peated, unpeated, etc. And what you're seeing here is sort of like a midway point. Actually, remind me, what ages kind of go in at this point? So what everyone has in their hand, what have we got for tonight?
The base recipe we have around about 8 to 85% 10, 12-year-old first fill bourbon, unpeated. Then we've got 10% of heavily peated, again 10 to 12-year-old first fill bourbon, and then we've got a final small percentage of aged stock, so 16, 18, 20 years old. So although Victoriana is a non-age statement, we're very much focused on the flavour. We don't want to, basically the youngest age in here is 10, we'd have to declare 10 on the label, but as we talked about, it's really about the focus on the flavour and paying homage and trying to recreate the style of whiskies that were coming out of Campbeltown during that boom time. So the 10 to 12-year-old unpeated, is the real backbone, that robust salinity. We're still operating relatively small stills today, which is really just a testament to the style of distilling that has been going on in the peninsula for centuries. And that's really the backbone of Glen Scotia. The heavily peated liquid, when we looked into the records at that time, we took a lot of knowledge from Alfred Barnard. He was a Victorian travel writer, and when he visited Campbeltown in the 1850s, the 1870s, when it was really at its peak, there were 21 operational distilleries when he visited Campbeltown, and he visited Scotia, as it was known at the time. And he noted that with the malted barley, Glen Scotia was also using a little bit of coal from the local coal mine to malt the barley, and what that did was infuse the whisky with a sort of dusty, smoky tarriness. And so with that smaller portion of peat in their modern day Victoriana, we're recreating that style of spirit, that dusty, smoky, lovely kind of robust oiliness combined with that, which we have records to prove was the type of spirit coming out of Glen Scotia at that time. And then we have our aged parcels as well. And that's really a testament to the blending techniques at the time. They've not really changed. We're not that great at with the crystal ball and determining, peaks and troughs in the market. So when whiskies were first being produced in Campbeltown in the 1830s, there's records to show that if there was up to 300 gallons under bond at any one time, production would slow down until they knew that they had a market for those whiskies. By the middle of the 1850s to the 1870s, they were pretty confident in the market, and so there was records of 300,000 gallons being shipped into Glasgow at any one time. In the period of, I think, 1857, that year, 300,000 gallons were transported into Glasgow. And so they were pretty sure of the market. They thought, we've got demand for this. But other years there might have been a dip. So yes, there would have been older whiskies along with younger whiskies in the whiskies that were coming out of Campbeltown during that time. So all these decisions were made based on the research that was done, really to inform us what would a Glen Scotia have tasted like in the 19th century, but using modern techniques that we have available to us today, recreating that style. So with the small stills, the heavily charred casks recreate that caramelization process of the wash, and then we also use, as I say, a combination of heavy char and PX. And sherry would have been drunk quite voraciously at that time. And with the invention of the steam engine during the Victorian age, the distilleries would have had access to the blending houses in Glasgow and the Central Belt in a matter of hours rather than days. There would have been a lot of cask trading, and we've seen records where the distillery owned Oloroso, PX casks. So we knew that there was an influence of sherry within the whiskies coming out of Glen Scotia at that time. So that was another piece of research that really informed how we build the Victoriana dram today.
There's hard to do justice to that, Ray, because what we're actually describing to you there and what you're probably getting a sense of is there's no manual or Bible waiting for us to go to find this stuff out, right? What we're doing is quite literally stumbling across sometimes or finding bits of information, and this is really in the art of what these guys do, piecing that together to try and build a picture. So that might be an run-up piece of writing which you happen to come across. We've had stuff sent in to us from loyal fans, and that can help build a picture. If we talk about double cask rum finish, for example, a different dram, which you should have tried today if you haven't already, we found out about rum casks in town being used by Glen Scotia purely from something that was under Ian McAllister's desk. I'm pretty sure it was supposed to be thrown out and we found it there. So it's the stuff you stumble across, but it all helps you build this sort of picture and this bigger narrative that helps you form a view and start to put this together. And then to Ashley's point, the skill around that is saying, well, we can't do exactly the techniques that were employed there because we've got different equipment, we've got different processes, so how do you turn what we can do today using what we have available to us and using our skills to create something representative, which is where we come to here.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the techniques that we use is obviously our heavy char, but the other finish is PX, and one of the reasons Glen Scotia and Campbeltown became such a boom town in the Victorian age, as we touched upon, was the invention of the steam engine and how it connected Campbeltown to Glasgow really in a matter of hours rather than what would have taken days, if not weeks, to get any goods or whisky transported. So the steamship really took the whisky from a local market and expanded it out, and so more people could drink our lovely spirit. But what that did in turn was the casks that were in the blending houses, the sherry casks, were transported between Campbeltown and Glasgow. So the PX finish that we use is not a first fill PX, and it's a very small portion of the recipe. And the reason was we knew that the casks had been used multiple times as they were transported between the blending houses and Glen Scotia distillery itself. And actually, yes, hi.
Do you know plus minus when the first cask, the sherry cask from Spain came to Scotland?
Oh, that's a really great question. I don't know actually. I wouldn't be able.
Talking Victoriana, then like when was it approximately? I thought it's something in the beginning of.
Well, I think it would have been probably a lot longer ago than Victoriana, because I think the likes of the Basques were seafaring nation for a long time, and yeah, I would think it would have been before then, and it's just a great example of how the geography of the region really shaped the whiskies coming out of it, because obviously Campbeltown is in a natural deep sea port, so there would have been trade happening centuries before the Victorian age, not just with casks but with goods and other trade, and that was one of the factors that made Campbeltown such a boom town in the Victorian age, was that geography, that natural harbour, all these trade ships coming in. The first port of call would have been Campbeltown. It's in a really sheltered harbour off the Atlantic, and likewise, again, it would be the last port before any goods were transported out across the Atlantic. So that was a real coup for the town that allowed the expansion of the Scotch whisky trade from Campbeltown. So shall we try some PX?
Ashley?
Yeah.
I understand that at that time period there would not have been any aged stock. Is that correct?
There wouldn't have been the core range whiskies that you see today.
Yeah, but do they have aged stock 150 years ago?
Yeah, so absolutely, there wouldn't have been kind of recipes or kind of contracts that we see today. So they would have been producing whisky, and maybe there wouldn't have been a market for it, so it would have sat in the warehouses and just matured quietly, and they would have incorporated with younger stock as demand then increased again. So that's really one of the reasons we use aged parcels in the Victoriana as well, to replicate the practices of the Victorian age.
The PX material, does that also go into these heavily charred ones? Do they go together?
Yeah, so we vat the base liquid that we talked about. It comes from first fill bourbon, and then we take 70% of that liquid and put it into heavily charred casks, and the other 30% goes into PX casks. They mature separately for a year, and then we bring them all together to create a lovely layer of flavour.
Is anybody missing a glass of PX sherry in that? We got round everybody. I lost track very quickly.
Actually, we've seen from the records as well that the first steamships to come out of Campbeltown in the 1820s, it was 1826, the steamship company was established, the trading route between Glasgow and Campbeltown. One of the founders of Scotia Distillery, as part of the Stuart and Galbraith conglomerate, he actually purchased the very first steamship called the Duke of Lancaster, and that made its maiden journey in 1827, transporting the lovely whiskies that were being produced in the region. So the founders of Glen Scotia Distillery were really instrumental in creating that market, that demand for Campbeltown whiskies in the boomtown. So that was a really exciting find, actually.
So I don't know how many whiskey festivals you've gone to before where sherry gets served, so hopefully this is a nice novelty to you, but to really kind of understand the finishing and the majesty of Victoriana, it's really helpful to understand the sherry itself. And here's where my knowledge ends, because I'm not much of a sherry fan, but having done this with actually a couple of times before, I now wish I was, and I have much better ambition to be, so hopefully you'll join us on that new journey as well. A whole new league of alcohol to explore is not a bad thing. So actually I'm going to stay very quiet on this one, unless I say something I shouldn't about sherry that I don't know. So, yeah.
And again, to recreate those caramelised notes and really add depth of flavour, you're getting loads of caramel from the PX. As I said, we've elected to use a second fill PX finish rather than a first fill PX finish with the Victoriana, because these casks would have been traded between Campbeltown and Central Belt of Scotland a couple of times and used several times, so you're not going to get that first fill sherry impact in the 19th century whiskies. So to create that style, the second fill just still allows that core spirit, the backbone of Campbeltown DNA to really shine through. Just a little bit of that caramelised note from the PX, some of the dried fruits, the spices, really adding layers of depth to the Victoriana and recreating that softer sherry impact that the whiskies in the 19th century would have had. We'll see a couple of drams in the courtyard today that have first fill Oloroso, first fill PX, and they do give a real richness, a punchiness, but that we felt wouldn't be true to the style of whiskies that were coming out of Campbeltown during the 19th century.
Just to clarify, you're not actually on sherry, so you're actually...
No, we're using sherry casks, yeah, so perfect prop opportunity. Oh, you've handed them out already. Yep, so here is a PX sherry cask stave. You can give it a wee nose, a wee sniff. You'll be able to see where the sherry's kind of infiltrated the wood. So when we fill the base whiskey, the Victoriana core liquid, into the PX sherry casks, it will extract lots of those lovely PX flavours that have infiltrated the wood in its previous life as a PX sherry hogshead in that case. So that's really our opportunity again to showcase the style of whiskey that was coming out of Campbeltown during that time. What do you make of it? Is this your first time trying PX on its own? It's rich, it's unctuous, it's really a great compliment, and I think because Glen Scotia as a spirit itself is very oily, it's very robust, there's a lot of salinity, that coastal influence, balanced with that real sweetness from the sherry, works incredibly well, and it's just great luck that these were the casks that were being used in the 19th century to fill the spirit at the time.
And already, even though we're drinking sherry, you start to get that sort of that stickiness, that unctuousness, all the things you just know about Victoriana. It just starts to peel back where that comes from, and I really find that here. It's odd with Victoriana, it's one of those drams that just keeps on giving for me. Like every time I get back to it, I find a different flavour, there's different something I hadn't discovered before, and I love that about it. But this for me really starts to just give a sense of how that DNA is kind of formed, because it really never tastes like a heavily sherry dram, but I can definitely pick up the nods from this into the final liquid, which will come to shortly.
Yes. Was there a question over this side of the room?
Yeah, in the last session, Gary was talking a little bit about how back in that time, if I understood correctly, it was a mixture of coal and peat they were using to dry the barley. And I would assume the coal would have a flavor we don't have access to now. So when you're working on the blend, what flavor do you attribute to the coal that we don't have today?
And that is that heavily peated portion that we use. So the majority of the liquid is unpeated, but as we've seen from records from Alfred Bernard's time in the town, the coal added a dusty smokiness. So we didn't want to have a huge amount of the recipe be that peated liquid. We elected for around 10%. And that just adds a little bit of peppiness, a little bit of smokiness on the back of the dram, adds a little bit of mouthfeel but doesn't overpower it. And again, that replicates that kind of smoky, tarry style that coal would have imparted on the whiskey. There was records, again, when we looked at records back in the 1600s, there was records of mining taking place on the Kintyre. So that was a huge factor in the success of Campbeltown as a whisky region, because they had a cheap local fuel source, and it was so important to the town that a direct rail link and canal was built from the far west of the Kintyre directly into Campbeltown, so it could service the distilleries and the industry at the time. And what also allowed the town to flourish was the skills of the local population. So a lot of Ayrshire kind of lowland farmers were relocated to the Kintyre Peninsula at the time of the Civil War in sort of the 1600s into the 1700s, and what they brought with them was farming knowledge, so that they could produce barley that, you know, as canny Scots, if there's any left over after the harvest, we will turn into liquid gold. So we had a really skillful local population. In 1744, a coopering society was set up in the town, and again shows the importance of whisky to the town. There was around about 34 coopers involved in this society in the 1740s. So you've got 100 years of coopering knowledge before the boom time really kicks off. So you've got a number of factors that led to that success. So local farmland, malted barley, really good quality, local fuel source in your coal to fund and fuel your industry, local knowledge and coopers and farmers, and one of the other major factors was actually the creation of Cross Hill Lock. In the 1820s, that was established by the Duke of Argyll, and he probably had inside parliamentary friends that were telling him that the Excise Act was going to come in a few years, which meant that Highland farmers, Highland distillers were going to get a much more favourable tax rate than their lowland compatriots, so that this really established legal distillation within the Kintyre Peninsula. So you need a lot of water to create whisky. So he commissioned Campbeltown, the lock, Cross Hill Lock, and to just demonstrate the importance of this water source to the distilleries, it had 3 10-centimetre pipes that made their way into the town. 2 of those pipes were dedicated to the distilleries. 1 of those pipes was dedicated to the washing water, the drinking water, whatever. So the distilleries, the illicit distillation that was going on at the time, before 1823 Excise Act was introduced, was profound. So much so that the Duke of Argyll knew that there was a need for fresh local water to supply them. And yes, once that 1823 Excise Act came into play, it was a go. All these factors meant that Campbeltown was primed and ready to be the whisky capital of the world.
Side note, I don't think it really stopped the illicit distilling happening from what I gather as well, which is a whole other kind of world of interesting stuff to mine into. There's a really nice book by Angus Martin, and he's a good guy locally for a chat as well, a historian that has got some great knowledge on the whisky industry. And it's just lovely little anecdotes, like the taxman would kind of come into town, and ahead of him would be a Campbeltown local with his waistcoat turned inside out to tell everybody hide your stills and shut off your sort of living room production, if you like. Fires lit in the hills like beacons, very Lord of the Rings, to sort of inform each other that he's on his way. Bury what you've got, basically, and pretend you're not there. So I don't think it really sort of curbed the illicit side of it. Even
there was a local gentleman called Robert Armour, and he was the local plumber and coppersmith. And we know that just how profound the illicit distilling was because he kept a record of all the small stills that he created for local people to, I don't know, cook up a thing or two. But when they were renovating his shop, and I think it was the 1870s they were renovating his shop, he did practice what he preached because they found a secret flue attached to the chimney and a large vat under the floorboards where he had been tinkering about and producing his own spirit. So they say. But yeah, no, very detailed records and exactly where all the illicit distills were, so I'm sure a gauger or two would have been very keen to get their hands on that book. But thankfully by the time it was actually discovered, the statute of limitations had passed. So shall we try the
I think it might be time.
The liquid itself and see how it...
Let's do it. What we're going to do, guys, if you've hopefully either got your glass on your lanyard empty, or one of your glass empty, we're going to pour straight into that for you. We're going to pre-pour, so I hope that's okay.
Come on up.